now let's come to the negative aspect first. The negative aspect of the Japanese occupation was the economic turmoil that occurred. Now, the Japanese conquered the territories in Southeast Asia with one. They did that for one goal, and that is to control the natural resources that you have in abundance in Southeast Asia. But what they failed to perhaps predict was that when they managed to control even though they managed to control the territories, for you to actually make money, right, profit from the natural resources in Southeast Asia, you must be able to trade them, to sell them to others. So here is where, right, economic embargo comes into place. Students of business and economics, right, you can look into this as an example of how trade embargo works. Now, the Americans, with their allies in America and so on, went on to uh, organize this trade embargo to such an extent that it really strangled the Japanese ability to gain wealth from the abundance of natural resources that they have now in their control from Malaya and Indonesia. They could not sell it basically. So when you can't sell it, so and there's no use for it when it comes to uh, any of the factories over here in Southeast Asia, so they suffered great losses. And to make things even worse, even more, is that when you look into this is something that comes into the situation or the reality of war strategies or war operations. When you have to surrender your land when someone is coming to occupy you, a very classic tactical approach that you would do in order for you to, in a way, make life miserable or difficult for your for the group that is coming to take over, is that you destroy the facilities, the infrastructure that you have in your place before you retreat, before you surrender. So that's what the Japanese and Dutch did very effectively. They actually, as much as possible, sabotaged the water supply. They destroyed as much as possible the seeds that are used for plantations to grow food and so on. So as a result of that, when the Japanese took over, they had to spend a lot of money for rebuilding. And that was something that was difficult for them to do because they had to channel a lot of their resources for the war, right? Because they had to continue to produce weapons, continue to train new soldiers, continue to have their ships across the areas in the Pacific, especially to defend themselves from the advancement of the American troops and others. So things were very difficult for the Japanese to the extent that eventually, during the last few years of the Japanese occupation, I would say around between 1943 and 1945 until the end of World War II, life on the ground was very difficult, right? You will hear stories from our grandparents stating that there was no food. Everyone just simply had to resort to eating tapioca. You know what tapioca is? Basically, it's something that's easy for you to grow. You can't plant rice or grow anything much because there was nothing, because the Japanese government could not provide them with the seeds that is needed that are needed when it comes to large scale plantation. So that's the negative effect, right? Life was hard, and the Japanese also became quite cruel in terms of the way they control the people. They don't want them they don't want people to listen to the radio. They don't want them to talk to anyone. The Chinese, especially the Chinese population in Malaya, were targeted a lot because the Japanese had strong issues with the Chinese and vice versa. The Chinese also, many of them, uh, at this particular point, uh, first or second generation Chinese community in Peninsula Malaya. They do remember about what happened in mainland China when the Japanese attacked and occupied large parts of mainland China. So there was great amount of animosity between the Japanese and the Chinese. So life was hard. So that's the negative aspect of it, right? No question. What's the positive aspect? Difficult for us to imagine, isn't it? But here's the thing. Coming back to the point about the war propaganda now, what the Japanese occupation did positively to the Malay local people, especially, was that it changed our mentality, our mindset when it comes to the way that we see ourselves in relation to the Western people, especially the British. I told you just now that the Japanese had fought against the Russians a couple of decades before World War II, defeated the British. So for the Malay people, this was an eye opener, right? Because in the past or previously before this, there is a great amount of inferiority complex amongst the Malay. They considered the British, the Europeans in general, to be bigger, stronger, more intelligent, and so on. So as a result of that, the Malay people began to feel uh, that there is a sense of hopelessness or helplessness, right, in which they believe that they cannot at any point defeat the British. So when they saw the Japanese, Asian people, just like us, maybe slightly fairer, but in terms of size, in terms of physical build, similar to the Malay local people, they were able to really defeat not only defeat but really kick the bottom of the British people, chase them out and force them to surrender. So the Malay people began to feel that, we can do this also if we were to unite and pool our resources together. We can defeat anyone, right? So the Japanese had proven that, and that is something that we ought to take as an example.